All right, y'all. I got to make two belts, two dog collars, and a rifle sling. Got to cut the strips. I cut all my strapping from double backs. I cut 1.5 inch wide strips for my belts and my dog collars. And then my strapping on the rifle sling is 1 inch wide. I buy waxed back, so on all of the surfaces that are going to get glued together, I need to knock off that wax coating. Um, I like the wax back. I feel like they're a little bit more uniform thickness, and if I do anything single layer, it's got a really nice finished back on it. Finishing that up, I leave the end where the buckle's going to be, where that's going to fold in on itself. I leave that to be waxed, so there's you can see there's a few inches on the end that isn't sanded. This is contact adhesive, contact cement. Put that on, let it almost fully dry. It'll get real tacky and press it together. I want to try to keep the edges as tight as possible, nice and even. And you're going to want to press that together. I like to use a coffee cup that has my face on it. You can hear Fifth Element in the background. Now I want to sand those edges because they're going to be slightly uneven because you're not going to get them perfect. So I drag them across the belt sander, and then I want to flip them 180 degrees and hit it from the other side. That way you're making sure you get it completely flat. And you don't want to leave it on there long enough that it burns because it doesn't burnish well, but you want to drag it across. And you see how nice and slick that is. See how uneven and then nice and slick. Oh, my hand model. Look at that. Then I'm going to knock down the tip just a little bit, and then where the two layer goes to one layer, I'm going to touch that corner just a little bit just to keep it from being so hard where that's going to fold under from the buckle. I've got a couple templates that I use for all of my holes on the tongue of the belt and then also for the buckle end. So I mark my center hole based off of whatever measurement that the person gave me. And then I do my holes like 3/4 inch on center. I do quite a bit of holes because I want there to be plenty of adjustability. Here I'm doing the buckle end. It's going to be 4 holes for 2 Chicago screws and then the center slot for the buckle. Punch the holes. Here I'm forgetting what I'm doing and I'm using uh, a dead blow hammer instead of that giant sledge sitting there, which I'll switch to in a second. And I punch my holes on the corner of my workbench. It's directly over the leg, and I'm sitting on like a 35-pound block of lead, and I keep 2 layers of leather on top of it. But that heavy dent, it's like hitting an anvil, and it doesn't. You don't have any bounce from the middle of the desk or anything, and it punches right through. It's nice. Speed up the rest. Wanted you to get an idea of how long it takes to punch all these holes. There, I switched to my real mallet. That's the rifle sling strapping. That's 1 inch wide. And that is the actual rifle sling head. This is a groover. I'm going to realize that I have it set for belt thickness right here and then not do the dog collar. I set this, it's not quite 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, but I want a nice deep groove. So I'm going to go over this 2 or 3 times, get a nice deep groove. And this is where the threads, when I stitch that together, are going to sit down in. And I do it a little closer to the edge on the dog collar because my stamping that I use for the lettering, and I also put the phone number underneath it, and it needs a little bit more room in the middle of the belt. And I do it on the front and the back, a little deeper on the front. And then here I'm doing a little tooling. The You get the leather wet, and then you can stamp in. Doing a little bit of decorative tooling on the two belts, and then I've already stamped the lettering. Nothing crazy. I don't do any of the like artistic flow tooling or anything, the floral stuff. There's some lettering. There's the phone number going on the dog collar underneath the lettering. So you can see how that just needs a little bit more space. So the stitching on the dog collar I put really close to the edge so that I can have room to do that. Here's my least favorite part of the entire process is burnishing. As soon as I get me a burnishing tool, it'll speed this up. I'm using gum tragacanth that I put on the edge, and then I use a little wood burnisher. It's like a dowel with grooves in it. You just gotta rub that on there. The gum tragacanth kind of helps lay down that stuff and firm up the edges. And you just gotta rub, 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 and it's horrible and annoying, and it takes forever. I think I have this sped up like 2,000% or something. It's This is daunting. I bet 5 of these, I bet it takes me close to an hour to burnish all of these. I know when people use the actual burnishing tool that's on like a grinder or a buffer, they just use beeswax, and there's a couple other products you can use for burnishing. The gum tragacanth has worked fine for me. And now we're staining. I'm still hand staining everything because I buy raw veg tan, and I do 5 or 6 different colors, so it's cheaper for me to have leather on hand than to buy colored or pre-dyed. So I use one of the wool applicators, try to get a nice uniform coat. I'm gonna start airbrushing my stains or my dyes. Um, I've read that you just use less product and you get more of a uniform color. I have to really saturate using hand applicator because if not, you'll see your marks. Like even there, like you can see the brush strokes. So you have to really saturate it so you can hide your brush strokes. So I'm gonna start attempting to do airbrushing on that. Wipe off the excess. I have to take a little Q-tip and poke down in all of the punched holes so that you don't have any raw spots. And all the belts and the collars this time are black. The rifle sling was mahogany. All right, right here, I'm getting ready to edge coat, and I use an edge coat product. Some people don't do this, some people do. I I like it on my belts. If I take the wool applicator and I catch it on fire, here I'll show you the difference. I catch it on fire and then wipe off the ashes, and I do it a couple times. You can see all of the fluffy bits on the unburnt one, and how it kind of tightens up and gets rid of all of the flyaway parts on the burnt one. It gives you less stragglers, and there's less little hairs like reaching down because the edge coat is kind of a thicker, it's a thicker coating. So if it reaches down and it wipes onto your face or your back, it you can blatantly see it once you do your top coat. So if I catch that on fire and then wipe off all of the extra, it gives you like a nice little tight ball to wipe your edge coat on with. And this is a pretty daunting task as well. It's not as bad as burnishing, but you have to be kind of slow and steady, wipe it on nice and easy, and you just want to get a nice uniform coat on your edges. It almost gives like a plastic edge kind of a look. It's a nice thick coating. And this is something that once I get a better burnisher, I might be able to get away from, which would be nice because this I would be able to drop this part in the process. And also, I don't think the edge coat lasts as long as like a nice waxed edged, but this is what I've been doing for a couple years now. See me bobbing around on my headset. I'm talking on Discord and jamming to some. That's my wife coming in asking what was on fire. Sitting here jamming to some house tunes or something and edge coating away. And I do one side and then I kind of let it dry and then I flip it over because I don't want to stick it down to my mat. So you have to do one side of the product and then wait and then flip it over and do it again and do the other side. And I don't do my rifle slings. I only do my double thickness. So here I'm painting in my lettering. So where I tooled the lettering, I use airbrush paint and I put it in these little model bottles, like applicator bottles for modeling. They have like a needle point, and I just squeeze the paint down into the grooves. And I'll show this first word. This belt says Dungeon Master on it. It's for all my D&D nerds out there. But it will it'll kind of fill in the tooling, and it gives a pretty good look. And it's much easier than using a brush for me. And it's a it can be a bit of a pain. I keep a piece of guitar string there to clean out the needle. You'll see me constantly wiping on that piece of paper towel, trying to get rid of the bubble on the end or something like that. Or if the paint's too thin, it will try to flow out when you flip the bottle over. The red is like a really good thickness. Some paints are thinner than others. I've played around with several different ways to apply this paint into the tooling, and these little squeeze bottles have like been the easiest for me. All right, now we'll speed it up. Right here, you'll see me kind of it kind of like shot more paint out than I wanted. I just go through with a Q-tip, and you can kind of like roll the Q-tip and kind of pick up the paint and try to clean it up. And I've got his name on the end. I can fit 3 letters really easily. I do people's initials a lot on the front, in front of the holes. Um, my son Jake, he wanted his whole name on there, so I just punch right on top of the first hole. It doesn't matter. And then the pink, I don't have any pink paint, so I just mix this myself. And that's another thing that's nice about these little bottles is I can put a few drops of paint in there, shake it up, and kind of make whatever colors. Like even this orange, it's like a motorcycle orange or something is what it's branded. Um, but it's almost a little too thin. I add a little bit of white to it, and it really makes it kind of like pop. It's not so deep, and it makes it feel a little brighter on the belt. Now here I'm using my airbrush to put on my top coat. I use an acrylic rosaline top coat. Um, I've always sponged them on. I use a piece of heavy sponge like you would use for like couch cushion. Like I would cut little pieces that are like 2-inch square, and I would sponge them on. It creates a ton of bubbles. It that the rosaline, when you drag it across the surface of the belt, it just creates tons of bubbles. It looks like you're putting foam on there, and then you have to keep wiping it in one direction really easily without squishing the foam to kind of drag the bubbles with it. And the airbrush, you use way less rosin, use way less product, and you get a really uniform texture. Um, you just kind of go over it. I'm bobbing to some house music or something in my headphones. Listen to like some Japanese DJs or something, who knows. But you can go over it several times before it dries and just keep kind of building up that layer and give you a really uniform layer and use a lot less product, which is nice. The sponging, you waste a lot because you're daubing on a piece of paper towel trying to like get rid of the bubbles, and you go back and you just keep wiping. All right, time to stitch it up. This is my big cowboy stitcher. This thing has saved me countless hours. This thing paid for itself immediately. Threading up some red. I've got all my bobbins pre-spun. I'll run out of my blue here in a minute. You'll see me redo a bobbin, but there we go. Thread that big old boy up. It's funny, some of these things I feel like are so fast. I'm like, oh, let me just stitch these. And then when I recorded it, I go back and I'm like, oh, it took me over an hour to stitch all of these. If I would stitch it by hand, it probably would have taken me 4 or 5 hours. Tighten that up. I try to position my stitching. I use a one-sided presser foot, and this is a walking presser foot, so it pulls from the top and the bottom. I try to position it so that I can, when I'm stitching around the belt, I'm going to go back over my starting stitch, so there's no back stitching. I'm just stitching over myself. So I start from one side, cross over where the two layers meet behind the buckle, then go all the way to the end and back, and then when I'm going back down, I'll cross over where I started, and that really locks everything in. I use a rolling guide. There's like there's a roller that clamps into the machine, and I can push it over, so I can push the belt up against that. And when I get to the end, I walk that last stitch in to get directly in the middle of the point, and then start stitching back around the tip from there. Run all the way down to the end of the belt. This machine will stitch through anything up to almost 3/4 of an inch thick. This machine is an absolute unit. So right here, I'm going over where I started, and then so I'm grabbing those strings where I started the stitch on that side. So I'm making sure I'm hitting the exact same holes. And then I'm going to run all the way down to the end, and this is where the buckle is going to be. So this is just decorative stitching at this point because there's only one layer of belt. Get back in my groove, go back up, and then it will step up onto the double thickness, and I'll make sure I hit those exact same holes again. So you'll see me slow down. The needle's so large and the stitching's so large, you want to make sure you're hitting the exact same holes. Like that. Alright, I'm doing black stitch on the orange belt, red on the red, blue on one dog collar and the rifle sling, and then pink on the pink dog collar. Right here, I'm doing the rifle sling, and I run out of blue in my bobbin, so I have to respin a bobbin. That's what I'm doing right here. The stitching in the rifle sling is mostly decorative because it's single layer, but it does kind of act as a resistor to stretching and warping. Like if it gets wet and stuff like that, it will kind of give it a little bit of strength so that the leather doesn't warp and wear out. So I wouldn't say it's completely decorative, but it's mostly decorative. I've done rifle slings that have no stitching at all, and they hold up fantastic. It's still a big slab of leather. And the dog collars, I actually stitch in the buckles, and I use a stainless buckle and a stainless D-ring, and those are all stitched in. So right here, I realized that I forgot to make my belt keepers, so I'm pulling some belt keepers. I do them about a ½ inch wide. I've done them wider. My belt, I think it's an inch because I put my maker's mark on the belt keeper. But ½ inch wide, about 4.5 inches long is enough to wrap around those two layers. And then I got to punch my holes in the ends for stitching. I hand stitch these, and then I need to dye them black. And I don't put these on the dog collars, I only do them on the belts. I could knock these out pretty quick though. All I gotta do is stain them. Right here, I punch 3 holes in each end, and I use my black thread for my sewing machine, and I just hand stitch it through, and I go down and back. And I don't think I recorded it, but then once those are stitched, I go ahead and I wipe those down with top coat, the acrylic rosin. That way they got a nice shine to them, and it makes the black really look black. And there we go. There's the belt keeper. Throw some hardware in. These are the Chicago screws that I use. I buy them from Weaver, same place I get my leather. They're some of the highest quality Chicago screws I've found. They're made for like saddles and stuff. Some of the ones I get from Amazon or Tandy, they feel like pot metal. They strip. If you get 50 in a package, you might get to use 20 or 30 of them. They strip out. Either the threads are crooked or the female side is just wonky. And these are like T15. So on the rifle sling, I don't put hardware on them for attaching to the sling or attaching to the gun, so you can put them wherever you want. So those holes will line up in any configuration, so you can lengthen or shorten the strap by putting those holes in other spots. Right there, you'll put a piece for hardware to attach the firearm, and then on the other side, you'll put a piece right there, and that's how you attach them. Here's the 2 Chicago screws, exactly the same, going in on the belt, and that's the nickel-plated brass belt buckle, non-magnetic. So if you want to sit it down next, if you're holding a compass or something like that, or anything that none of you guys could care about. And then right there's the belt keeper. I just slide it on from the end. And I don't have it between the keepers because the belts are so stiff. I like to be able to just kind of tuck it up over the tip. And that's a finished belt, man. Nice and slick. You can probably tow your car with it. It's almost a 1/4 inch thick. This is a work belt and then a dress belt for my son. Dog collars. Got the name and phone number on there, which is cool. My maker's mark. Big stainless steel buckle, stainless steel D-ring. They're made exactly the same way as the belts, 1.5 inch thick. Inch and a half wide, sorry. And there's the mahogany rifle sling, and I do some of those with sheep shearling backing or saddle shearling, gold or white saddle shearling. I think that blue stitching on that mahogany looks sweet. Right on.